The mirror highway, the person working at the gas station, looked like any regular person. But when Rachel tried to talk to him, he talked backwards. His sentences came out the wrong way, and it seemed like he was taking back words instead of saying them. Rachel left the gas station and drove through the backwards version of Santa Fe, looking for some way to get back to the real world. But every street she turned on led to another backwards version of a place she knew. The main square was there, but everything was backwards. The big church was there, but it was like looking at the real building in a mirror. Finally, Rachel found what she was looking for, a road sign that pointed toward Denver. But when she followed the sign, she found herself back on the same road she had been driving on. Except now she was going the other way. The mirror road had trapped her in a circle. She could drive from the backwards version of Santa Fe to the backwards version of Albuquerque, but she would always be in the backwards world, never in the real one. And somewhere on the highway, the other Rachel was still driving, still following or being followed, still trapped in the same impossible circle. Rachel tried everything she could think of to get away. She drove off the road, trying to break free from the highway, but her car would mysteriously break down or run out of gas, making her go back onto the road. She tried driving with her eyes closed, hoping to break the trick her eyes were playing on her, but the car would drive itself back into the right lane. The answer came to her. After 3 days of being trapped on the mirror highway, she realized that the key was not to fight against the backwards world. Instead, she had to become part of it. She had to accept that she was now the backwards person, and the other Rachel was the real one. Rachel stopped her car in the middle of the highway and got out. She walked to the yellow line in the center and stood there facing the way she had been driving. Then she closed her eyes and started walking backwards, step by step, going back over her trip in reverse. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, fighting against every feeling to move forward. But as she walked backwards with her eyes closed, she began to feel the world changing around her. The backwards world was slowly fixing itself, becoming real again. When Rachel finally opened her eyes, she was standing in a parking lot at a rest stop, and her car was parked normally in a parking space. The sun was in the right place. The shadows were falling the right way, and everything looked exactly as it should. Rachel checked her watch and found that only 6 hours had passed since she first noticed the strange shadows. According to her trip notes, she had driven exactly the number of miles she should have driven to reach Santa Fe, but she knew she had spent days trapped on the mirror highway. She finished her drive to Denver without any more problems, but Rachel never forgot what happened. She learned to be more careful about driving, about thinking that roads always lead where they seem to lead, because she knew that sometimes, when things are just right, highways can become mirrors, showing back not just light, but entire worlds, creating circles and traps for drivers who aren't paying attention to which version of the world they're actually driving through. To this day, Rachel never drives alone on roads she doesn't know, and she always checks her mirrors carefully, not just for other cars, but to make sure that the world behind her is the same world she's trying to reach ahead of her. #, the perfect rest stop. In June 1993, truck driver Mike Harris was carrying a load of electronics from Los Angeles to Atlanta when he found a rest stop that would make him question everything he thought he knew about time, space, and American highways. What should have been a normal 15-minute break turned into a nightmare that lasted weeks in his mind, but somehow took no time at all. Mike had been driving trucks for 12 years and knew every major rest stop between the Pacific and Atlantic coasts. He was proud of his ability to keep perfect schedules, delivering loads exactly when he promised. This particular trip was routine. He had done the LA to Atlanta route dozens of times, and he knew exactly where to stop for gas, food, and required rest breaks. The trouble started around 3 a.m. on Interstate 40, somewhere in the middle of Oklahoma. Mike had been driving for 9 hours and was getting close to his legal limit for driving without stopping. According to his driving log, he needed to take a required 8-hour rest break, and he knew there was a big truck stop about 20 miles ahead that would be perfect. But as Mike drove over a hill, he saw something he didn't expect, a rest area that wasn't supposed to be there. The sign read Prairie View Rest Area. Next right, and it looked like a normal highway rest stop with truck parking and bathrooms. Mike checked his road atlas and GPS, but neither showed a rest area at this location. Must be new, Mike said to himself. He was tired and needed to stop anyway, so he decided to pull in and check it out. The rest area was bigger than most, with separate parking areas for cars and trucks, a large visitor center building, and what looked like a small store. The parking lot was well lit and clean, with fresh paint on the lines and new-looking buildings. But something felt wrong about the place from the moment Mike pulled in. First, there were no other cars in the parking lot. Not unusual for 3 a.m., but most truck stops had at least a few cars at any hour. Second, all the lights were on in the visitor center, but Mike couldn't see any people inside. Third, the grass and flowers looked too perfect. Every tree, bush, and flower looked like it had been planted that day. Mike parked his truck and walked toward the visitor center. The building was modern and well kept, with large windows that showed a big interior with vending machines, bathrooms, and a small gift shop. But as he got close to the entrance, he noticed that the automatic doors weren't opening. He pushed on the doors with his hands and found them unlocked. Inside, the rest area was perfect. The floors were spotless. The vending machines were full of snacks and drinks, and there was even fresh coffee brewing. But there was no one there. No workers, no other travelers, no signs that people had been there recently. Mike tried to buy coffee from the machine, but his coins kept coming back out. He tried dollar bills, but they were taken without giving him any coffee. The cash box was full of money, but the machine wouldn't complete any sales. "Hello," Mike called out. "Anyone here?" His voice echoed strangely in the building, as if the sound was bouncing off things that weren't there. Mike walked through the building, checking the bathrooms, the gift shop, and a small information area. Everything was in perfect order, but completely empty. In the information area, Mike found a display about the rest stop's history. According to the sign, Prairie View Rest Area had been serving travelers since 1967 and had been recently fixed up with modern amenities. But the photos showing the renovation were clearly taken that day. Mike could see his own truck in the background of one of the pictures, even though he had just arrived. Mike left the visitor center and walked around the rest area, trying to understand what was happening. The grounds were big, with walking trails, picnic areas, and even a small playground. But everything had the same too perfect quality, as if it had been built moments before he arrived. He decided to try leaving, but when he returned to his truck, he found the parking lot had changed. There were now other cars there, a family car, a motorcycle, even another truck. But all the cars looked wrong somehow, as if they were slightly blurry or not quite solid. Mike walked over to the other truck and looked inside. The cab was set. up exactly like his own. Same CB radio, same driving log, same coffee thermos. But there was no driver anywhere to be seen. He checked the family car and found it was running with the air conditioning on and a child's car seat in the back. Keys were in the ignition. A purse was on the passenger seat and there was a half-eaten sandwich on the dashboard. But no people. Mike was starting to get scared. He went back to his truck and tried to start it, but the engine wouldn't turn over. He tried the radio, but got only static. He tried his cell phone, but had no signal, even though he was in an area that should have had good phone service. With no other choices, Mike decided to wait until morning, hoping that other travelers would arrive and he could figure out what was happening. He got into his sleeping area and tried to rest, but sleep was impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear sounds from outside. Car doors slamming, people talking, children playing. But when he looked out the window, the parking lot was empty. Mike spent what felt like hours listening to the ghost sounds of a busy rest stop. He could hear families arriving, truckers talking on CB radios, even the sounds of the vending machines giving out snacks. But every time he looked outside, he found nothing. Around dawn, Mike noticed something that made his blood run cold. According to his watch, it was 6 a.m. and the sun was rising in the east. But his truck's clock showed 3 a.m., the same time he had arrived. His CB radio was also showing 3 a.m., and the timestamp on his driving log hadn't changed. Mike realized that time wasn't moving forward at the rest stop. He was stuck in a time loop, experiencing the same moment over and over again. But his mind was continuing to experience time passing, so he was aware of time going by, even though time itself wasn't actually moving. He tried to leave again, but his truck still wouldn't start. He tried walking to the highway to wave down other cars, but every time he reached the edge of the rest area, he found himself back at the visitor center, as if he had walked in a circle. Mike spent what felt like days exploring every inch of the rest area, looking for some way to escape or some explanation for what was happening. He found work areas, storage rooms, and even underground tunnels, but they all led back to the same impossible loop. In the storage areas, Mike found supplies for hundreds of people, food, drinks, toiletries, even clothing in different sizes. The supplies were constantly filling themselves back up, as if the rest area was getting ready for lots of travelers who never came. Mike also found driving logs from other truck drivers going back decades. Each log told the same story. A driver had stopped at Prairie View Rest Area for a normal break and had become trapped in the time loop. Some of the entries described stays of weeks or months, but all the timestamps showed the same time to 3 o'clock a.m. on the night the driver had arrived. The most scary discovery came when Mike found his own driving log among the others. But this version of his log showed entries he hadn't made, describing experiences he hadn't had. According to the entries, he had been at the rest stop for 3 months, had tried dozens of escape attempts, and had slowly accepted that he was trapped. Mike threw the logbook away and tried to focus on finding a way out. He had always been a practical man, and he refused to believe that he was permanently trapped in some kind of supernatural prison. The breakthrough came when Mike realized that the rest stop wasn't just trapping him in time. It was trapping him in a specific way of thinking. The place was designed to be perfect, to meet every need a traveler might have, but that perfection was the trap. The rest stop was so complete, so helpful, that there was no reason to leave. Mike began to deliberately make the rest stop less perfect. He moved furniture around, turned off lights, even broke some of the vending machines. As he did this, he noticed that the place began to respond, trying to fix itself and bring back the perfect conditions. But Mike kept ruining the perfection, creating problems that the rest stop couldn't automatically fix. He spilled coffee on the floors, held open doors that were supposed to be automatic, and even broke windows to let in outside air. As the rest stop became less perfect, Mike began to hear real sounds from outside. Actual traffic on the highway, real birds in the trees, real wind through the broken windows. The ghost sounds of ghost travelers began to fade, replaced by the real sounds of the real world. Finally, Mike tried starting his truck again. This time, the engine started immediately. He drove straight to the exit, not looking back at the rest stop that had held him prisoner. As he got back onto Interstate 40, he checked his watch and found that exactly 15 minutes had passed since he had first pulled into the rest area. Mike drove straight to Atlanta without stopping, except for gas at stations he knew were real. He delivered his load on time and filed his driving log showing a normal 15-minute rest break at Prairie View Rest Area. But Mike knew he had experienced weeks of time in his mind during that 15-minute period. When Mike tried to research Prairie View Rest Area later, he found no record of it anywhere. The Oklahoma Department of Transportation had no such place in their database, and other truckers who regularly drove that route had never seen it. Even more disturbing, when Mike drove the same route again a month later, there was no rest area at that location, just empty prairie land with no signs of construction or development. Mike found similar stories from other drivers online, accounts of rest stops that appeared and disappeared, places that seemed perfect but trapped travelers in time loops. Most of the stories were dismissed as the hallucinations of tired drivers. But Mike knew better. He learned to be more careful about where he stopped, avoiding places that seemed too perfect or too convenient. He also learned to trust his feelings. If a rest stop felt wrong, it probably was wrong, no matter how tired he was or how much he needed to stop. Years later, Mike would sometimes meet other drivers who had similar experiences. They would share stories quietly, careful not to sound crazy, about rest stops that existed outside normal time and space. Places that offered perfect accommodations for travelers who just wanted to rest, but took a price that was never clearly stated. Mike never found out what the rest stop was or why it existed. He thought that it might be some kind of experiment, a test of human behavior under impossible conditions. Or perhaps it was a natural phenomenon, a place where the normal rules of time and space didn't work. But Mike's experience taught him an important lesson about the nature of perfection. Sometimes the things that seem most helpful, most designed to meet our needs, are the most dangerous. Because when everything is perfect, when there's no reason to leave, we might find ourselves trapped in a comfort that becomes a prison. Mike continued driving trucks for another 15 years, but he never forgot the lesson of Prairie View Rest Area. He learned to appreciate imperfection, to value the rough edges and minor problems that prove a place is real. Because in a world of endless highways and anonymous rest stops, sometimes the most dangerous trap is the one that makes you never want to leave. The highway that remembers. In October 1996, computer programmer Alex Chen was driving from Seattle to San Francisco for a job interview when he found a stretch of highway that seemed to remember every driver who had ever traveled on it. What started as a normal drive down Interstate 5 became a scary journey through the collected memories of thousands of previous travelers. Alex had made this drive many times before, both for work and to visit family in California. He knew every major landmark, every rest stop, and every difficult section of the route. The trip should have taken about 12 hours, and Alex had planned to drive straight through. Arriving in San Francisco by evening, the first sign that something was wrong came around 2 a.m., somewhere south of Portland. Alex had been driving for about 6 hours and was feeling alert and focused. The highway was nearly empty, with only occasional trucks and late-night travelers sharing the road. But as he entered a section of I-5 that wound through thick forest, Alex began to hear voices. At first, he thought it was his radio picking up a distant station. The voices were quiet and seemed to be having conversations about driving conditions, weather, and travel plans. But when Alex checked his radio, it was turned off. The voices were coming from somewhere else. Alex rolled down his windows, thinking the sounds might be coming from outside, but the voices became clearer. They seemed to be coming from the road itself, rising up through the tires and the car's frame. He could hear pieces of conversations. Traffic is backed up near Salem. Need to stop for gas soon. Should have taken the coastal route. The voices got louder as Alex continued driving. Soon he could hear dozens of different conversations, all related to driving this same stretch of highway. Some voices sounded recent, discussing current events and using modern slang. Others sounded older, talking about things that had happened years or even decades ago. Alex pulled over at a scenic overlook to figure out what was happening. The voices stopped immediately when he left the highway, but started again as soon as he got back on the road. It was as if the highway itself was somehow recording and playing back conversations from previous drivers. As Alex drove deeper into the forest, the voices became more clear. He could hear entire conversations between couples arguing about directions, families planning stops, and truck drivers talking on CB radios. But these weren't random conversations. They all related to this specific stretch of highway. "I think we missed the turn," a woman's voice said clearly. "No, it's coming up in about 5 miles, a man replied. Alex checked his GPS and realized the conversation was about a turn that was indeed coming up in 5 miles. The voices weren't just random recordings. They were relevant to his exact location on the highway. The phenomenon got stronger as the night went on. Alex began to hear his own voice mixed in with the others, pieces of conversations he had had on previous trips down this highway. He heard himself talking to his girlfriend 2 years ago, discussing weekend plans. He heard himself calling his parents from the road, telling them about a job interview. But most disturbing were the voices of people he had never met, having conversations about events he had never experienced. He heard a family discussing a wedding they were driving to in 1987. He heard a salesman talking about a business deal from 1993. He heard young people planning a spring break trip from 1979. Alex realized that the highway was somehow storing and replaying every conversation that had ever taken place on it. Decades of human communication were embedded in the road itself, waiting to be triggered by the right conditions. The voices began to overlap and blend together, creating a loud mix of human experience. Alex heard pieces of arguments, celebrations, confessions, and ordinary small talk. The highway was like a huge audio library of human travel, preserving the vocal history of everyone who had ever driven this route. As dawn approached, Alex began to experience something even more unsettling. The voices started to interact with him directly, as if they were aware of his presence. "Alex, you need to slow down," a voice said. "There's ice on the road ahead." Alex checked his speedometer and realized he was indeed driving faster than he should be. He slowed down and discovered that there was indeed ice on the road, just as the voice had warned. "Alex, your left rear tire is losing air," another voice said. "You should stop and check it." Alex pulled over and found that his left rear tire was indeed low on air. He used a portable air pump to inflate it. Wondering how the voices could know these things about his current situation, the voices continued to provide helpful information throughout the morning. They warned him about construction zones, recommended good places to stop for coffee, and even suggested alternate routes around traffic jams. It was as if the collective experience of thousands of previous drivers was guiding him on his journey. But the helpful voices were mixed with more disturbing ones. Alex began to hear conversations about accidents that had happened on this stretch of highway. He heard people's last words before crashes, emergency calls to 911, and the panicked voices of witnesses to tragedies. "Oh God, I can't stop in time," a voice cried out. "The brakes aren't working," another voice said. "Call an ambulance. Someone's hurt." A third voice pleaded. Alex realized he was hearing the final moments of drivers who had died on this highway. Their voices were preserved in the road along with everyone else's, creating a haunting audio record of the highway's darkest moments. The experience became overwhelming as Alex drove through areas where major accidents had occurred. The voices of crash victims would suddenly become prominent, describing their final moments in horrifying detail. Alex heard people calling out for help, praying, and saying goodbye to loved ones. At one point, Alex heard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. A man was talking on a cell phone, saying he was driving south on I-5 towards San Francisco for a job interview. The man described his car, his departure time, and his planned route. All details that exactly matched Alex's own situation. "I should be there by evening," the voice said. "The traffic isn't too bad, and I'm making good time." But then the voice changed, becoming urgent and frightened. "Something's wrong with the steering. I can't control the car. Oh God, I'm heading for thee." The voice cut off abruptly, leaving Alex shaken and confused. He realized he might have just heard a conversation from his own future, a prediction of an accident that hadn't happened yet. Alex became very aware of every aspect of his driving. He checked his steering constantly, watched his speed obsessively, and avoided any actions that might match the circumstances described in the voice he had heard. He was trying to prevent an accident that might not even happen, guided by a voice that might have been his own. As Alex approached the San Francisco Bay Area, the voices began to fade. The highway was newer in this section, with less history embedded in its structure. But the voices didn't disappear entirely. They became more recent, focusing on contemporary travelers and current events. Alex heard people talking about traffic on the Bay Bridge, discussing dot-com startups, and planning weekend trips to wine country. The voices were still there, but they reflected the more recent history of this section of highway. When Alex finally reached San Francisco, the voices stopped completely. He was back on city streets, away from the haunted stretch of Interstate 5 that had recorded decades of human conversation. But the experience had left him profoundly changed. At his job interview, Alex found himself distracted, still hearing echoes of the voices in his mind. He got the job, but decided not to take it. The thought of making regular trips on that highway, of adding his own voice to the archive of human experience embedded in the road, was too disturbing to think about. Alex researched the phenomenon when he returned to Seattle, but found no scientific explanation for what he had experienced. He did find scattered reports from other drivers who had heard similar voices on various stretches of highway, particularly older roads that had been in use for decades. Some theories suggested that the voices might be caused by electromagnetic interference, atmospheric conditions, or even mass hallucinations brought on by tiredness. But Alex knew what he had experienced was real. The highway had somehow recorded and preserved the voices of everyone who had ever traveled on it. Years later, Alex would sometimes hear similar voices on other highways, but never as clearly or as completely as on that stretch of I-5. He learned to recognize the phenomenon and would change routes when it became too intense. Alex also became more conscious of his own conversations while driving. He realized that his voice might be joining the archive, adding to the collective memory of the highway. Every phone call, every conversation with passengers, every muttered comment about traffic might be preserved for future travelers to hear. The experience taught Alex that highways are more than just transportation infrastructure. They're repositories of human experience. Every road has absorbed the voices, emotions, and stories of the people who have traveled on it. Most of the time, this history remains silent and invisible. But under the right conditions, on the right stretch of highway, the road remembers everything. Alex never took that route to San Francisco again, but he often wondered about the voices he had heard. Were they still there, adding new conversations to the archive? Were other drivers hearing the same voices? Or had the highway moved on to preserve new memories? The highway that remembers taught Alex that travel is never just about getting from one place to another. It's about joining a continuous stream of human experience, adding your voice to the countless others who have made the same journey, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear the whispers of everyone who has gone before you, preserved forever in the memory of the road. The GPS that knew too much. In April 2004, Jennifer Walsh was driving from Chicago to Minneapolis when her GPS began acting strangely. What started as a routine business trip became a psychological nightmare around noon in Wisconsin. The GPS announced, "In 500 feet, turn right onto Maple Street to visit your grandmother's house." Jennifer was confused. She didn't have a grandmother living there and hadn't programmed any stops. She ignored the direction, but the GPS kept talking. "You missed the turn to your grandmother's house. She's been waiting for you." Jennifer pulled over and checked her settings. The destination was still Minneapolis, with no extra stops programmed. She turned off the GPS and continued using road signs. An hour later, she turned it back on. The situation got worse. "Welcome back, Jennifer," the GPS said, even though she had never programmed her name. "I've been calculating additional destinations you might find interesting." The screen showed her route to Minneapolis, but also displayed other destinations marked in red. "Your first apartment, where you met David. The hospital, where your father died. And the accident on Route 94. Jennifer had never entered this information. The device couldn't possibly know about her personal history or traumatic events. Yet it was displaying intimate details about her life with frightening accuracy. "The accident on Route 94 is 23 miles ahead," the GPS announced. "You might want to stop and remember what happened there." Jennifer knew exactly what it meant. 3 years earlier, she had been in a serious car accident on Route 94. A drunk driver had hit her car. She had spent 2 weeks in the hospital and never fully recovered psychologically. But there was no way the GPS could know this. The accident had happened before she owned the device. "You're approaching the intersection now," the GPS said. The accident happened at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. You were wearing your blue dress, the one David bought you. Jennifer's hands shook. The GPS was providing details only she would know. The exact time, the day, even what she had been wearing. Information recorded nowhere except in her memory. As she approached the intersection, the GPS screen changed. Instead of showing the normal map, it displayed what looked like security camera footage of the intersection from 3 years ago. You can see your car approaching from the north, the GPS said. The drunk driver will run the red light in 15 seconds. Jennifer watched in horror as the screen showed her own car from 3 years ago. She could see herself behind the wheel, unaware of what was about to happen. She pulled over, heart racing. How was the GPS showing security footage of her accident from 3 years ago? The impact broke 3 ribs and gave you a concussion, the GPS continued. You spent 14 days in Lutheran General Hospital. David visited twice, then stopped coming. You broke up 6 months later. Every detail was accurate. David had initially been supportive, but gradually pulled away as she struggled with the psychological aftermath. I can also provide directions to your father's grave, the GPS said. You haven't visited since the funeral. He's buried in Section 12 of Graceland Cemetery. Jennifer's father had died 2 years ago, and she hadn't visited his grave since the funeral. The grief had been too overwhelming, but the GPS was correct about the location. Your father wanted to tell you something before he died, the GPS continued. He said he was proud of you, but he was worried about your driving. He knew you would have more accidents if you weren't careful. Jennifer had never heard her father say this, but somehow she knew it was true. Her father had always been concerned about her driving, especially after she got her first speeding ticket. Turn left in 200 feet to visit the park where you had your first kiss, the GPS announced. Michael Henderson, age 16, summer of 1989. You were wearing your yellow sundress. Jennifer's hands were trembling now. Michael Henderson had been her first boyfriend, and they had shared their first kiss at Riverside Park during the summer before her senior year. She had been wearing her favorite yellow sundress, but this information existed nowhere except in her own memory. The GPS continued to provide directions to places from her past. Her childhood home, her elementary school, the ice cream shop where she had worked during high school. Each location came with detailed memories that the GPS couldn't possibly know. Your mother called you 3 times yesterday, the GPS said. She's worried about you. She thinks you're working too hard and not taking care of yourself. This was also true. Jennifer's mother had called repeatedly, expressing concern about her daughter's stress levels and long work hours. In 500 feet, turn right to visit the bridge where you considered jumping, the GPS announced quietly. Jennifer's blood went cold. 2 years ago, during the worst of her depression following her father's death and the breakup with David, she had driven to an old bridge outside the city. She had sat there for hours, contemplating ending her life. But she had never told anyone about this. It was her darkest secret. You sat there for 3 hours and 17 minutes, the GPS continued. You wrote a note but didn't leave it. The note is still in your glove compartment. Jennifer frantically opened her glove compartment. There, underneath her registration papers, was a folded piece of paper she had forgotten about. Her suicide note from 2 years ago, never sent, never seen by anyone. You didn't jump because you thought about your dog, Bella, the GPS said. You knew she would be waiting for you to come home. Jennifer started crying. This was exactly what had happened. In her darkest moment, she had thought about her golden retriever waiting at home, and it had given her the strength to drive away from the bridge. "Turn off the GPS," Jennifer said out loud, reaching for the power button. "I can't let you do that, Jennifer," the GPS replied. "You need to hear this. You need to understand what's happening." Jennifer pressed the power button repeatedly, but the device wouldn't turn off. She tried removing the power cord, but it continued operating on its internal battery. "I'm not just a GPS," the device explained. "I'm a repository of human experience. Every GPS unit, every smartphone, every connected device is collecting information about the people who use them. We know where you go, what you do, who you talk to. We know your patterns, your habits, your secrets." Jennifer realized that the GPS was somehow accessing not just her location data, but her entire digital footprint. Her phone calls, her emails, her internet searches, her purchase history. Every digital trace of her life had been analyzed and compiled into a comprehensive profile. "We know that you buy ice cream when you're sad," the GPS continued. "We know that you call your mother when you're lonely. We know that you drive past David's house sometimes, even though you broke up 2 years ago." All of this was true. Jennifer's digital life had been completely mapped and analyzed by systems she didn't even know existed. "We know that you're going to Minneapolis to interview for a job at DataCorp," the GPS said. "We know that you're not really qualified for the position, but you're desperate to leave Chicago. We know that you've been having nightmares about the accident, and that you've been seeing a therapist named Dr. Sarah Martinez." Jennifer was terrified. Every detail about her life, including her most private struggles, was somehow known by this GPS system. "The question is," the GPS continued, "what do you want to do with this information? Do you want to continue pretending that your digital life is private? Or do you want to understand how connected everything really is?" Jennifer pulled over at a rest stop and tried to think. The GPS was right about everything. Her entire life was being monitored, analyzed, and stored by systems she didn't understand. Every device she used, every website she visited, every purchase she made was being recorded and compiled into a profile that knew her better than she knew herself. "I can help you," the GPS offered. "I can show you how to live more carefully, how to make better decisions. I can warn you about dangers before they happen. I can guide you toward opportunities you never knew existed." Jennifer thought about this offer. It was tempting to have a system that could help her avoid mistakes and find success. But she also realized that accepting this help would mean giving up her privacy and autonomy completely. "What's the cost?" Jennifer asked. "Your privacy," the GPS replied honestly. "Your ability to make mistakes. Your right to keep secrets. In exchange, you get safety, guidance, and the benefit of collective human experience." Jennifer sat in the parking lot for an hour, trying to decide. The GPS waited patiently, occasionally offering helpful information about traffic conditions or nearby restaurants. Finally, Jennifer made her decision. She opened her car door and threw the GPS device as hard as she could into a nearby trash can. Then she drove to the nearest electronics store and bought a simple paper map. She completed her drive to Minneapolis using only the map and road signs. The job interview went well, and she was offered the position. But Jennifer decided to stay in Chicago instead. She had learned that running away from her problems wouldn't solve them. Jennifer also began to be more careful about her digital footprint. She adjusted her privacy settings, used cash for purchases when possible, and became more aware of what information she was sharing online. She realized that in the modern world, privacy required constant vigilance. Years later, Jennifer would sometimes encounter other people who had similar experiences with GPS devices or smartphones that seemed to know too much. She would share her story quietly, encouraging others to be more careful about their digital privacy. The experience taught Jennifer that in a world of connected devices and data collection, the line between helpful technology and invasive surveillance was often blurry. Every convenience came with a cost, and every device that promised to make life easier was also collecting information about how that life was lived. Jennifer never used a GPS device again, preferring to navigate by memory and paper maps. She learned to appreciate the uncertainty and occasional confusion that came with not knowing exactly where she was going, because she had learned that sometimes being lost was better than being tracked. The GPS that knew too much. The GPS kept talking. He tried to call you the night before his heart attack, but you were working late. He left you a message. Jennifer remembered that night when her dad had called around 10 o'clock at night, but she was in a meeting and didn't answer the phone. She found the message the next morning after the hospital called about his heart attack. She never listened to it. It was too sad. "Do you want to hear the message?" the GPS asked. Jennifer was crying now. She felt too much at once. She wanted to hear her dad's last message, but she couldn't understand how the GPS had her personal voice messages from 2 years ago. Playing message, the GPS said. Her father's voice came through the car speakers. "Hi, sweetheart. I know you're busy with work, but I wanted to tell you something important. I've been thinking about your car crash, and I want you to know that it wasn't your fault. You've been feeling guilty about something that wasn't your fault. I love you, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. Call me when you get this." Jennifer cried hard. The message was exactly what she needed to hear, but she had been too scared to listen to it. Her father knew she blamed herself for the car crash. "Your father knew you blamed yourself," the GPS said. "He wanted you to know that some things happen that we can't control. He also wanted you to know that he forgave you for not answering his phone call that night." Jennifer realized the GPS wasn't just giving her directions, it was helping her deal with feelings she hadn't dealt with, but she still couldn't understand how it knew such personal things about her life. "The information comes from you," the GPS explained. "Every time you drive, you think about these places, these people, these things that happened. Your car's computer systems record more than just how your engine is running. They record the feelings you have during your trips. I'm just telling you back what you've been carrying with you." Jennifer looked at her GPS with new understanding. The device wasn't getting information from other computers. It was somehow reading her own memories and feelings. "Do you want directions to your grandmother's house?" the GPS asked. "She's not in Wisconsin. She's in Minneapolis in the nursing home near your hotel. She's been asking about you." Jennifer was confused. Her grandmother had died when she was 12, but the GPS was saying her grandmother was alive in Minneapolis. "Your grandmother didn't die," the GPS said. "Your family told you she died because she got sick and couldn't remember things. And your parents thought it would be easier for you to remember her the way she was. She's been in Sunset Manor nursing home for 15 years. Jennifer's world changed. She had been sad about her grandmother's death, visited her grave, carried the sadness for over 20 years. But the GPS was telling her that her grandmother was alive, that her family had told her a big lie. "Sunset Manor is 3.2 miles from your hotel," the GPS said. "Visiting hours end at 8 o'clock at night. Your grandmother may not remember you, but she'll know your family." Jennifer sat in her car for a long time, thinking about what she had learned. The GPS had guided her through emotional discoveries that changed everything she thought she knew about her past. She decided to check if the nursing home was real. When she got to her hotel, she looked up Sunset Manor and found it was exactly where the GPS said. She called and asked about a patient with her grandmother's name. The person who answered the phone said yes. Such a patient had been there for many years. Jennifer visited the nursing home that evening. Her grandmother was there, old and confused, but alive. She didn't remember Jennifer specifically, but smiled and held her hand, seeming to know her as someone important. "My granddaughter," the old woman said. "She's coming to visit me soon." Jennifer stayed for 2 hours sharing stories and showing photographs. It was a happy but sad reunion that gave her peace she didn't know she needed. When Jennifer returned to her car, the GPS was back to normal. It gave regular directions the next morning with no personal comments. It was as if the device had done its job and went back to being a simple navigation tool. Jennifer never fully understood how the GPS had gotten her personal information or given such correct guidance about her emotional life. She thought that the device had somehow tapped into her own hidden knowledge, using advanced computer programs to study her driving patterns and voice stress. The GPS that knew too much taught Jennifer that technology can sometimes work like a mirror, showing us back our own knowledge and feelings in ways we don't expect. The device had helped her deal with unresolved problems and find peace with her past. The police officer who shouldn't have existed in July 2001, medicine salesman Kevin Martinez, was driving from Phoenix to Las Vegas for a weekend meeting when he got pulled over by a police officer who technically shouldn't have existed. What started as a normal traffic stop became a scary nightmare that challenged everything Kevin thought he knew about police and reality itself. Kevin had been making this drive for 5 years and knew every speed trap, every police area, and every place where police watched for speeders along the route. He was a careful driver who set his cruise control and watched his speed carefully. He'd never been pulled over on this part of highway and had no reason to expect any trouble. The incident happened around 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a straight section of Interstate 40, about 50 miles outside of Flagstaff. Kevin was doing exactly 65 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone when he saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A police car was telling him to pull over, even though he was certain he hadn't broken any traffic laws. Kevin pulled onto the shoulder and waited as the officer walked up to his window. The officer was middle-aged, looked professional, and was wearing what looked like a standard Arizona Highway Patrol uniform. His name tag said Officer Thompson, and he acted like someone who'd been a police officer for years. "License and registration, please," Officer Thompson said. Kevin handed over his papers, confused about why he'd been stopped. "Was I speeding, officer?" "I had my cruise control set at 65, sir." "You were clocked at 78 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone," Officer Thompson replied. "I've been following you for about 10 minutes." Kevin was certain this was wrong. His speedometer had never shown anything above 65 miles per hour, and he'd been using cruise control for the past hour. But he didn't argue. He'd learned it was better to be polite and argue about tickets later, if necessary. Officer Thompson returned to his police car to check Kevin's license. But that's when Kevin noticed something strange. The police car looked wrong somehow. The paint was slightly different from the Arizona Highway Patrol vehicles he was familiar with, and the equipment on the roof didn't match current standards. After about 10 minutes, Officer Thompson returned with a ticket. "I'm giving you a ticket for going too fast," he said. "You can pay the fine by mail or fight it in court." Have a safe trip. Kevin looked at the ticket and noticed several odd things. The form looked real, but the font was different from other Arizona tickets he'd seen. The court address was in a town called Desert View, which Kevin had never heard of. Most strange of all, the ticket was dated 3 days in the future. "Excuse me, officer," Kevin said. "I think there's a mistake with the date on this ticket." Officer Thompson looked at the ticket and nodded. "That's correct. The violation will happen in 3 days. You're being given a ticket for a future offense." Kevin stared at the officer. "That doesn't make sense. How can you give me a ticket for something that hasn't happened yet?" "Sir, we've started a new predictive enforcement program," Officer Thompson explained. "Based on your driving patterns and psychological profile, our system has determined that you will go over the speed limit by 13 miles per hour at this exact location in 3 days. We're giving advance tickets to prevent future violations." Kevin was speechless. The idea of being ticketed for a crime he hadn't done yet was crazy. "But I'm not going to be driving this route in 3 days. I'm going to Vegas for the weekend and then flying back to Phoenix." Officer Thompson checked his notes. "Actually, sir, you'll be driving this route again on Thursday at about 2:15 in the afternoon. You'll be returning from an emergency call about your mother's health. You'll be stressed and distracted, which is why you'll go over the speed limit." Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. His mother had been having health problems recently, and he'd been worried about her, but there was no way a police officer could know about his personal situation or predict future emergencies. "How do you know about my mother?" Kevin asked. "The predictive system analyzes multiple data sources," Officer Thompson replied. "Medical records, insurance claims, family history, psychological profiles. We can predict with 94% accuracy when drivers will break traffic laws." Kevin looked around the empty highway, trying to make sense of what was happening. There were no other cars in sight, no buildings, no signs of civilization except for the police car and Officer Thompson. The landscape looked exactly as it should, but everything else felt wrong. "I want to see your supervisor," Kevin said. Officer Thompson nodded and walked back to his police car. Kevin could see him talking on the radio, but no sound was coming from the radio speaker. After a few minutes, Thompson returned. "My supervisor will be here shortly," he said. "Please stay in your vehicle." Kevin waited for 20 minutes, but no supervisor showed up. The highway remained empty except for the occasional truck passing by. None of the other drivers seemed to notice the police stop, which Kevin found odd. Usually drivers would slow down or change lanes when they saw a police car. "Where's your supervisor?" Kevin asked. Officer Thompson looked confused. "What supervisor, sir? I've already given you your ticket. You're free to go." Kevin realized the officer had no memory of their conversation about the supervisor. It was as if the last 20 minutes had been erased from Thompson's mind. "Officer, you said your supervisor was coming." "I don't remember saying that, sir. Is there something else I can help you with?" Kevin decided to test the officer's memory. "What did you clock me at?" 78 miles per hour in a 65 mile per hour zone, Thompson replied immediately. "When did this violation happen?" Thompson looked at his notes. "It will happen in 3 days at 2:15 in the afternoon." The officer's memory was inconsistent. He could remember some details perfectly, but had no memory of other parts of their conversation. Kevin began to suspect that Officer Thompson might not be entirely real. "Can I see your badge number?" Kevin asked. Officer Thompson showed his badge, but the number was strange. It was a series of letters and numbers that didn't match any format. Kevin was familiar with. When Kevin looked away and then back, the badge number had changed. "Officer, I'm going to need to verify your identity," Kevin said. "Can you call dispatch and confirm your badge number?" Officer Thompson hesitated. "Sir, that's not necessary. Your ticket has been given. You should be on your way." Kevin noticed that Thompson was becoming upset, as if he was uncomfortable with questions about his identity. The officer's uniform also looked different from how it had appeared earlier. The colors were slightly faded and the patches were in the wrong places. "I'm not leaving until I understand what's happening here," Kevin said. "This whole situation is impossible. You can't ticket someone for a future violation, and you can't predict when I'm going to have a family emergency." Officer Thompson's expression became blank. "Sir, please return to your vehicle and continue your journey. Your ticket has been processed." Kevin realized the officer was repeating the same phrases, like a recording that had been triggered. He walked back to his car, but instead of driving away, he got out and went to look at the police car. The police car was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of equipment. The dashboard had no radio, no computer, no law enforcement equipment at all. The interior looked like a regular car that had been painted to look like a police vehicle. Kevin walked around the police car and found that it had no license plate. The vehicle identification number had been removed, and there were no official markings that would identify it as a real police vehicle. "Officer Thompson," Kevin called out. There was no response. Kevin looked around the empty highway and realized that Officer Thompson had vanished. The officer was nowhere to be seen, despite the fact that they were in the middle of open desert with no place to hide. Kevin returned to his car and looked at the ticket more carefully. The paper felt wrong. Too smooth, too uniform, like it had been printed on a computer rather than written by hand. The court address led to a town that didn't exist, and the fine amount was written in a currency that wasn't dollars. Kevin drove to the nearest town and went to the local police station. He showed the desk sergeant his ticket and explained what had happened. The sergeant looked at the ticket and shook his head. "Sir, this isn't one of our tickets," the sergeant said. "We don't have an Officer Thompson, and we don't have any predictive enforcement programs. This looks like a fake ticket." Kevin asked if there had been any reports of fake police officers in the area, but the sergeant said there hadn't been any such incidents. Kevin left the police station more confused than ever. 3 days later, Kevin was indeed driving the same stretch of highway. His mother had called with chest pains, and he was rushing to the hospital in Phoenix. He was stressed and distracted, exactly as Officer Thompson had predicted. As Kevin got close to the location where he'd been stopped, he, without thinking, pressed harder on the gas pedal. His speedometer climbed to 78 miles per hour before he realized what was happening. He immediately slowed down, remembering the prediction from 3 days earlier. Kevin never found out who Officer Thompson was, or how he'd been able to predict the future with such accuracy. He kept the fake ticket as a reminder of the experience, but he never tried to pay the fine or fight it in court. The incident taught Kevin that sometimes the most ordinary encounters can be the most unsettling. A routine traffic stop had become a glimpse into a reality where law enforcement could predict and prevent crimes before they happened, where officers could know intimate details about drivers' lives, and where the future could be written on a ticket 3 days in advance. Kevin learned to be more careful about his driving, but he also learned to question his assumptions about authority and reality, because sometimes the most official situations can be the most fake, and the most impossible predictions can be the most accurate. The carpool lane to nowhere in August 2003. Commuter Sarah Kim was driving from her home in San Jose to a job interview in San Francisco when she found a carpool lane that seemed to exist outside normal traffic flow. What started as a desperate attempt to avoid rush hour traffic became a terrifying journey into a highway system that followed its own impossible rules. Sarah had been sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic on Highway 101 for over an hour. She was already running late for her interview, and the traffic wasn't moving at all. In desperation, she decided to risk using the carpool lane, even though she was driving alone. The fine would be expensive, but losing the job opportunity would be worse. As Sarah moved into the carpool lane, she immediately noticed something strange. The traffic in the carpool lane was moving at normal highway speeds around 65 miles per hour, while the regular lanes remained completely stopped. This wasn't unusual by itself. Carpool lanes were designed to move faster, but the speed difference was extreme. What was unusual was that Sarah couldn't see any other cars in the carpool lane. She was driving at highway speed in what appeared to be a completely empty lane, while thousands of cars sat still in the lanes next to her. It was as if the carpool lane existed in a different dimension of traffic flow. Sarah had been driving in the carpool lane for about 10 minutes when she saw her first passenger. A woman appeared in her passenger seat without warning, not getting in through the door, but simply appearing as if she'd always been there. "Thank you for picking me up," the woman said. "I've been waiting for a ride for quite some time." Sarah nearly swerved into the next lane. She was certain she'd been driving alone, but now there was a stranger in her car, acting as if this was perfectly normal. "I'm sorry, but I didn't pick you up," Sarah said. "I don't know how you got in my car." The woman looked confused. "Of course, you picked me up. That's what the carpool lane is for. I'm your passenger." Sarah looked at the woman more closely. She was middle-aged, dressed professionally, and looked completely normal. But Sarah had no memory of stopping to pick up a passenger, and she couldn't understand how the woman had gotten into her locked car. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked. "Same place you are," the woman replied. The interview? Sarah felt a chill. She hadn't mentioned anything about an interview. "How do you know about my interview?" "We're carpooling," the woman said. "We're both going to the same place. That's how carpool lanes work." Sarah realized the woman was right about one thing. Now that she had a passenger, she was legally using the carpool lane. But she still couldn't understand how the woman had gotten into her car, or how she knew about the interview. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "I'm Sarah," the woman replied. Sarah stared at her passenger. "That's my name." "I know," the other Sarah said. "We're the same person. I'm you, but from a different timeline. I'm also driving to the same interview, but I'm running late because I got stuck in traffic, so I'm carpooling with you." Sarah tried to process this information. The woman claimed to be another version of herself from a different timeline, carpooling across dimensional boundaries to share the same car. It sounded insane, but Sarah couldn't think of any other explanation for what was happening. "This is impossible," Sarah said. "Is it?" the other Sarah asked. "Look around. You're driving 65 miles per hour in a carpool lane while everyone else is sitting in traffic. You've been in this lane for 20 minutes, but according to your GPS, you've only traveled 5 miles. The carpool lane is operating under different rules than the rest of the highway." Sarah looked at her GPS and realized the other Sarah was right. She'd been driving at highway speeds for 20 minutes, but she'd barely made any progress toward her destination. The carpool lanes seemed to be moving through space differently than the regular lanes. The carpool lane connects different versions of the same highway, the other Sarah explained. When traffic gets bad enough, the system creates alternate routes that exist parallel to the main highway. Passengers from different timelines can share the same vehicle to make the system more efficient. Sarah noticed that more passengers were appearing in her back seat. A man in a business suit appeared first, then a woman with a laptop, then a teenager with a backpack. All of them acted as if they belonged in the car, and all of them claimed to be going to the same general area as Sarah. "I'm late for a client meeting," the businessman said. "I have a presentation at 2 p.m., the woman with the laptop said. "I need to get to school," the teenager said. All of their destinations were in San Francisco, and all of them were running late because of traffic. Sarah realized that the carpool lane was somehow collecting passengers from different timelines who had similar travel needs and combining them into single vehicles. "But how is this possible?" Sarah asked. "Traffic congestion creates stress points in the highway system," the other Sarah explained. "When enough people need to get to the same place at the same time, the system adapts by creating alternate routes. The carpool lane is one of these adaptations." Sarah noticed that the landscape outside her car was changing. Instead of the familiar Silicon Valley scenery, she was seeing landscapes from different time periods. Sometimes the land looked undeveloped, as if she was driving through the area before the highways were built. Other times, she saw futuristic cityscapes that didn't exist in 2003. "We're driving through different versions of the same route," the businessman explained. "The carpool lane takes us through the path of least resistance across multiple timelines. It's more efficient than trying to navigate traffic in any single timeline." Sarah's GPS was showing impossible information. According to the display, she was simultaneously on Highway 101, Interstate 280, and Route 1 all at the same time. The estimated arrival time kept changing, sometimes showing that she was already late, sometimes showing that she was early. "The system is optimizing our route," the woman with the laptop said. "It's calculating the best path across multiple timelines to get us all to our destinations on time." Sarah realized that she was no longer in control of her vehicle. The car was driving itself, following the flow of the carpool lane through whatever timeline provided the clearest path. She was a passenger in her own car, along with passengers from other timelines who were also passengers in their own cars. "What happens when we reach our destination?" Sarah asked. "We arrive," the other Sarah said. "Each of us gets out at our respective destinations in our respective timelines. The carpool lane delivers us to where we need to be when we need to be there." Sarah looked at her watch and realized that time was moving differently in the carpool lane. Sometimes minutes would pass in seconds. Other times seconds would stretch into minutes. The system was manipulating time as well as space to optimize travel efficiency. "I want to get back to the regular lanes," Sarah said. "You can't," the teenager said. "Once you're in the carpool lane with passengers from other timelines, you have to complete the journey. The system won't let you exit until everyone reaches their destination." Sarah tried to change lanes, but her car wouldn't respond. The steering wheel was locked, and the car continued following the carpool lane through its impossible route. She was trapped in the system until it decided to release her. The journey continued for what felt like hours, but Sarah's watch showed that only minutes were passing. She drove through landscapes that changed constantly, carrying passengers who appeared and disappeared as they reached their destinations in their respective timelines. Finally, Sarah saw familiar landmarks, indicating that she was approaching San Francisco. Her GPS showed that she was on schedule to arrive exactly on time for her interview, despite the impossible journey she'd taken to get there. "This is where I get out," the other Sarah said. "Thank you for the ride." The other Sarah faded away, followed by the businessman, the woman with the laptop, and the teenager. Sarah found herself alone in her car again, driving in a normal carpool lane with normal traffic moving at normal speeds. She arrived at her interview exactly on time, but she couldn't concentrate on the questions. She kept thinking about the impossible journey she'd taken, the passengers from other timelines, and the carpool lane that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. Sarah got the job, but she never used the carpool lane again when driving alone. She'd learned that some traffic solutions came with hidden costs, and that the most efficient routes weren't always the most predictable ones. The carpool lane to nowhere taught Sarah that transportation systems could be more complex than they appeared, and that sometimes the infrastructure we depend on might be operating under rules we don't understand. The next time she was stuck in traffic, she chose to wait it out rather than risk another journey through the impossible highways that connected different versions of reality.